The whispered plea. The late afternoon sun filtered through the skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta, casting long shadows across the bustling sidewalks. Officer Logan Ross adjusted his cap, squinting against the golden light as he monitored the pedestrian traffic. Today's shift had been uneventful so far, which suited him just fine. After years on the force, he knew that quiet days were a rarity, a gift in a job filled with tension and uncertainty. Logan's partner, Officer Derek Hines, leaned against their patrol car, arms folded as he scanned the area. "Feels like something's brewing, doesn't it?" he remarked, his gaze unwavering as he scanned the street. Logan smirked, shaking his head slightly. "Don't jinx it, Derek," he replied, the hint of a smile on his face. "Last time you said that, we ended up in that mess with the street racers on Liberty Avenue." Derek chuckled, crossing his arms. "Point taken," he said, shrugging. Just as Logan was about to suggest a coffee break, he noticed a figure moving toward them on the sidewalk. It was a young girl, her thin frame draped in an oversized, faded hoodie. She moved slowly, her gaze cast downwards, and every step seemed labored, hesitant. Logan's instincts immediately kicked in, sensing something was off. "Hey, you see her?" he asked Derek, nodding toward the girl. "Yeah," Derek replied, straightening up, his eyes narrowing. "Looks lost, or something." Logan watched as the girl came closer, finally stopping just a few feet from them. She looked barely 13, her face pale and her dark eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or perhaps just exhaustion. He could see now that her cheeks were sunken, her lips chapped, and her fingers gripped the edges of her hoodie tightly. "Hello there," Logan greeted her, his voice gentle, attempting to set her at ease. "Is everything all right?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a glimmer of desperation there, an unspoken plea for help. She took a hesitant step forward, glancing nervously at Derek, then back at Logan. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she leaned in and uttered two words that sent a chill through him. "Help me." Logan felt his pulse quicken as he processed the simple request, but his years of training helped him keep his face calm and approachable. He knelt down to meet her gaze, his tone soft. "You're safe here. Can you tell me your name?" The girl hesitated, biting her lip before answering. "My name is Ava." "Ava," he repeated, nodding reassuringly. "That's a beautiful name. Do you want to tell me what's wrong?" Ava glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might be watching. Her hands clutched the fabric of her hoodie tighter, and her gaze darted back to Logan. I ran away," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I need help. Please don't let him find me." The words were enough to set every alarm off in Logan's mind. He exchanged a glance with Derek, who nodded subtly, signaling that he understood the gravity of the situation. "Who are you running from?" "Ava," Logan asked, maintaining a gentle tone as he spoke. He didn't want to scare her, but he needed to understand the threat she was facing. Ava looked down, her fingers shaking. "A man named Marcus," she whispered. He took me. I don't know where I was, but I got away." Her voice cracked, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Please don't let him take me back." Logan felt his heart clench at the vulnerability in her voice. He'd heard stories of missing children and runaways before, but having one standing in front of him, so visibly shaken and pleading for safety, was different. He knew this was a critical moment. Every word and every action would determine how she responded. He nodded, trying to reassure her. "Ava, you're safe now," he promised. "We won't let anyone hurt you. We'll figure out how to keep you safe, all right?" Ava's lips quivered as she managed a small nod, but her eyes remained fearful, darting from side to side, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. Logan turned to Derek, keeping his voice low. "We need to get her out of here. Bring her back to the station and get social services involved." Derek nodded, already reaching for his radio to make the necessary calls. Meanwhile, Logan stayed close to Ava, speaking to her in a calm, soothing voice as they began walking toward the patrol car. "Ava, we're going to take you somewhere safe. We'll get you some food, maybe some clean clothes, and you can tell us anything you want us to know. You're not alone in this." Ava looked at him, the hint of relief beginning to soften her face. She climbed into the back seat, her movements slow and cautious. Logan joined her, sitting beside her as Derek took the wheel. The drive back to the station was quiet, with Logan doing his best to keep Ava comfortable. He asked her a few gentle questions, slowly coaxing more information from her about her life and the man she was running from. As she shared fragments of her story, Logan felt a mix of anger and sorrow. Ava had been taken from her home, manipulated and controlled, her childhood stolen away by someone who preyed on the vulnerable. Arriving at the station, Logan guided Ava inside, where a few officers greeted her with warm smiles. They directed her to a small, comfortable room where she could sit while they arranged for social services to join them. Ava sat in the chair, her small frame hunched as she wrapped her arms around herself, as if to shield herself from the world. Logan stayed by her side, offering her a warm cup of cocoa. "It's been a long day for you," he said gently. "This might help a little." Ava accepted the cup with a small nod, taking a tentative sip. For the first time, Logan noticed a faint smile cross her face, though it was fleeting. He knew it would take time for her to feel any semblance of safety, let alone happiness, after all she'd been through. A few minutes later, a woman from social services arrived, a middle-aged lady with kind eyes and a soft voice. She introduced herself as Mrs. Waller and knelt beside Ava, speaking to her in a gentle, reassuring tone. "Ava, I'm here to help you," she said softly. "Whatever you need, we'll make sure you get it. You're safe now, I promise." Ava looked at Mrs. Waller, her eyes still wary but softening as she absorbed the woman's gentle words. Logan watched from the doorway, his mind racing with thoughts about what Ava had been through and the man she feared. The name Marcus echoed in his mind, a reminder of the shadow that loomed over this young girl's life. As Mrs. Waller led Ava down the hallway to arrange for a temporary foster placement, Logan felt a growing determination rise within him. He knew that whatever it took, he would uncover the truth about Marcus and ensure that Ava never had to live in fear again. Into the shadows, Logan sat at his desk, his fingers drumming lightly against the cold metal as he mulled over the events of the afternoon. Ava's whispered plea echoed in his mind, and every detail she had given so far painted a disturbing picture of her life with Marcus. He knew that beneath her quiet fear lay the scars of a child who had been forced into survival far too soon. As he reviewed the notes he jotted down, Derek approached and slid a file onto his desk. "Pulled a few strings and got us some intel," he said, his voice low. "Turns out we have a record on Marcus Barnes. If this is the same guy, he's been in and out of the system for years, mostly minor offenses, but it sounds like he's been escalating." Logan glanced over the file, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the details. Marcus Barnes, 36 years old, a string of charges including fraud, petty theft, and possession, but there was something far darker hidden between the lines. In his 15 years on the force, Logan had seen how minor offenders could spiral into more dangerous paths, and it seemed Barnes was no exception. "Any recent activity?" Logan asked, not taking his eyes off the file. "Some odd ones," Derek replied, leaning over to point at a recent arrest for trespassing. He was picked up near an elementary school. Claimed he was just passing through, but witnesses reported him lingering by the gates. Logan's jaw tightened. He could feel the pieces falling into place, the insidious patterns of someone preying on the vulnerable. So he's not just a petty criminal. He's been watching, waiting, and maybe even recruiting. God knows how many kids he's lured in like he did Ava. Derek nodded grimly. "We don't know how deep this goes, but if we're looking at a trafficking operation," he let the thought hang, knowing Logan understood the full weight of that implication. Determined to unravel the mystery of Marcus Barnes, Logan picked up the phone and dialed his contacts at the state's Child Exploitation Task Force. Within minutes, he was patched through to Agent Rita Navarro, a specialist in child trafficking cases. Her reputation for persistence and compassion was well known in law enforcement circles. Navarro, her voice crackled through the line. Agent Navarro, this is Officer Logan Ross from Atlanta PD. I've got a case you need to hear about. Logan began, laying out the story as concisely as he could. He could sense her attention sharpening as he described Ava's plea, the limited information they'd gathered about Marcus, and the suspicions forming around his activities. This doesn't sound like his first rodeo, Navarro said, her voice laced with concern. If he's running a ring, there's likely a network he's using to stay below the radar. That's what I'm afraid of, Logan replied. Ava's safety is my top priority, but I want to bring down this operation. Navarro promised to send over recent intel on suspected trafficking routes and hubs in the area. Before ending the call, she advised Logan to keep Ava's location confidential. If Marcus has connections, he'll be looking for her. It's critical that we don't let anyone outside the team know where she's staying. As he hung up, Logan's gaze drifted to the clock. It was past midnight, but he couldn't shake the urgency pressing down on him. This was no ordinary case. There were too many unknowns, too many shadows surrounding Ava's story. He knew he wouldn't rest until he had pulled her out of them for good. The following morning, Logan received a call from Mrs. Waller, the social worker who had arranged for Ava's foster placement. She's with a very reliable family, Mrs. Waller assured him, her voice soft but confident. The Andersons have fostered several children in the past, and they're aware of the sensitivity surrounding Ava's situation. Thank you, Logan replied, feeling a wave of relief. He knew the Andersons by reputation. They were known for their compassion and stability, two things Ava desperately needed. Mrs. Waller hesitated before continuing. She did ask about you, Officer Ross, she added. She wanted to know if you'd be visiting her again. The question caught Logan off guard. He hadn't expected Ava to form any attachments so quickly, but he realized she must have seen him as a lifeline, someone who had offered her safety in a world that had given her so little of it. I'll make time to see her, he promised. Let her know I haven't forgotten about her. After the call, Logan gathered his case notes, reviewing everything they knew about Marcus. He had already sent the file to Navarro, and he hoped her team would uncover more about the man's connections. Later that day, Logan drove out to the Andersons' home to check on Ava. Their house was a cozy two-story structure surrounded by a white picket fence and flowering shrubs. As he approached the front door, he heard the soft murmur of voices inside, followed by a warm laugh that reminded him of home. Mrs. Anderson, a kind woman with silver-streaked hair and a gentle demeanor, opened the door. You must be Officer Ross. She greeted him with a smile. Ava has told us a lot about you. Logan returned the smile, stepping inside. Just doing my part. Is she around? Mrs. Anderson nodded, leading him through the house to a sunny room at the back, where Ava sat by a window, a sketchbook open in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a small, tentative smile. Hey, Ava, Logan greeted, keeping his tone soft. How are you settling in? Ava nodded, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the sketchbook page. It's nice here. Mrs. Anderson made me pancakes this morning, she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise, as though such simple kindness was unfamiliar. That sounds wonderful, Logan replied, sitting down across from her. You're in a safe place now, Ava. No one can hurt you here. Ava's gaze dropped, and Logan could see the shadow of doubt lingering in her eyes. She clutched the sketchbook tighter, her fingers whitening against the paper. But what if he finds me? She whispered. He has friends. They'll know where to look. Logan's jaw tightened. Ava, we're not going to let that happen. I promise you, we have people watching over you. Marcus and anyone else who tries to hurt you will be stopped. Ava nodded, but her expression remained tense. Logan could tell that her fears ran deep, scars left by the horrors she had endured. He reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said gently. "We're here to help you every step of the way." As he left the Andersons' house, Logan's determination solidified into a steely resolve. Ava's trust in him was fragile, but he would do everything in his power to protect her. Back at the precinct, Logan met with Derek and a few other officers in the task force who would be handling the investigation. Navarro's team had already sent over a few leads, including a list of properties linked to Marcus's associates. They had also flagged a small warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been under quiet surveillance for months due to suspicious activity. "We'll start with the warehouse," Logan announced, showing the others the layout. "If Marcus is hiding, he might be using this place as a safe house." As they prepared for the operation, Logan briefed the team on what to expect. They'd go in quietly, aiming to gather intelligence without alerting Marcus. Every detail counted. They needed evidence of his involvement in trafficking and any other criminal activities that would keep him behind bars. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Logan and Derek approached the warehouse, blending into the shadows as they observed the building. It was a rundown structure with boarded-up windows and peeling paint, but every so often, they caught glimpses of movement through the cracks. "Looks like we've got company," Derek muttered, his gaze fixed on the faint lights flickering inside. Logan nodded, signaling for the team to proceed with caution. They moved silently, their footsteps muffled against the gravel as they circled the warehouse, assessing every possible entry point. Inside, they found evidence of recent activity: empty food containers, discarded clothing, and the unmistakable scent of stale cigarette smoke. But what caught Logan's attention was a stack of documents on a makeshift table in one corner. Among them were photographs of young girls, along with detailed notes that sent a chill through him. The images were grainy, likely taken from a distance, but he recognized Ava's face in one of them, her expression filled with terror. "Damn it," Logan whispered, a surge of anger flaring within him. Marcus had been watching her, tracking her every move. Derek stepped up beside him, his face hardening as he took in the photos. "This guy's sick," he muttered. "He's been planning this for a while." They gathered every document, every piece of evidence that could tie Marcus to his criminal activities. Logan's mind raced as he considered the implications. Ava wasn't the only one. There were other children, other names scrawled across the papers, each representing a life caught in the web of this predator. As they made their way out of the warehouse, Logan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that Marcus Barnes was dangerous, a man who had slipped through the cracks of the system for too long. But this time, he wouldn't let him get away. When he returned to the station, Logan immediately filed his report, attaching every piece of evidence they had gathered. It was late, the station quiet as he finished the paperwork, but he was far from finished. He knew he couldn't rest until he had taken Marcus down and freed Ava, and every other child like her, from the grip of terror that had stolen her innocence. That night, as he finally left the station and headed home, Logan felt the weight of the case settle heavily on his shoulders. He knew the journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but he was prepared to face it. For Ava, and for every child who had been hurt by Marcus Barnes, he would fight. And he would not stop until justice was served. Breaking the silence. The morning sun cast its golden glow across the Atlanta precinct, but Officer Logan Ross was anything but rested. Despite the night's heavy investigation at the warehouse, his thoughts had been consumed by the haunting images they'd found. The grainy photographs of children like Ava, all snared in Marcus Barnes's twisted web. Each face represented a story that needed justice, and Logan felt the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. As Logan prepared for another long day, his phone buzzed. It was Agent Navarro. Her voice was sharp but steady, a mix of urgency and determination. "Officer Ross, I just got wind of something you'll want to hear. We've identified 2 safe houses Marcus Barnes's network may be using to traffic kids. she began. "One of them is just across state lines, but the other, it's right here in Atlanta, hiding in plain sight." Logan's pulse quickened. "You think he's hiding there now?" "It's likely," Navarro replied. "Barnes's network has been elusive, but this could be the breakthrough we've needed. I'm authorizing a tactical operation, but we need you and your team on site to help. I'll send you the address." Within moments, Logan had assembled his team and briefed them on the mission. The location was an old apartment complex on the outskirts of town, a forgotten building that had slowly decayed over the years. The place was just isolated enough that it could host a network of illegal operations without drawing much attention. As Logan reviewed the floor plans with Derek and the others, he felt a simmering anger rise within him. "Remember," Logan instructed his team, "our main objective is to secure any kids in there, as well as apprehend Marcus or any of his associates. Expect resistance, but we go in quietly. Any sign of Marcus, and we lock him down immediately." They split into two groups, each entering the building from opposite sides. The complex was a ghost town, its once bright walls now dulled by grime and neglect. Crumbling drywall, shattered windows, and the faint odor of mildew filled the air as they moved cautiously through the building. Logan's group approached a locked door on the second floor. Pressing his ear to the door, he heard muffled voices and the faint hum of a television. With a swift nod, Derek prepared to break in, positioning himself with practiced precision. Logan took a steadying breath and signaled the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The door flew open as they stormed inside, weapons drawn. A man seated on a worn-out couch leaped up, his eyes wide with terror. Logan recognized him immediately from the photographs at the warehouse, one of Marcus's closest associates. "Police," Logan barked, his voice steady and commanding. "Hands where we can see them." The man froze, his hands trembling as he raised them above his head. But before Logan could even begin his questioning, his eyes caught movement in the corner of the room. Huddled together were two young girls, no older than 12, their faces pale and eyes hollow with fear. Logan's heart sank. The evidence was more real than he'd imagined, and the horror these children had faced was written clearly on their faces. Derek moved to the girls, lowering himself to their level, and speaking softly. "It's all right. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." One of the girls, her hair tangled and face streaked with dirt, looked up at him, her expression blank but hopeful. "Promise," she whispered, her voice fragile. Derek nodded, his voice warm. "I promise." Logan turned his focus back to the man. "Where is Marcus Barnes?" he demanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The man shifted nervously, his gaze darting around the room. "I don't know," he stammered. He moves around a lot. I don't always know where he is." Logan clenched his jaw. He knew this type, the ones who lived in fear of men like Marcus, too afraid to speak the truth, even when caught red-handed. But Logan also knew that this man was their only lead, and if they wanted to find Marcus, he had to push harder. "Listen to me," Logan said, his voice low and firm. "You're facing serious charges here. If you cooperate, it could work in your favor. Tell us everything you know about Marcus's operations. Now." The man's eyes darted to the window, but he quickly realized there was no escape. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. Okay, he muttered. "Marcus, he has another place he goes to, a safe house just outside town. It's isolated, near the river. He keeps things there, things he doesn't want people finding." Logan's mind raced as he processed the information. A safe house near the river. It was the best lead they had so far. After calling in additional support to secure the children and their captor, Logan left the apartment complex with Derek, a renewed sense of urgency driving him forward. If Marcus was at this second safe house, they needed to act fast. Every minute he stayed free was another minute he could harm someone else, another chance he had to evade justice. They drove in silence toward the riverside location, the air thick with tension. Logan couldn't shake the thought of Ava, her terrified eyes as she whispered those 2 words to him at the precinct. He imagined the other children, the ones who had never found their way to safety, who had fallen victim to men like Marcus. It fueled his resolve, steeling him for what was to come. The safe house was a small, dilapidated cabin hidden among the dense trees. The river wound around the property, its waters slow and murky. Logan and Derek parked a short distance away, approaching the house with silent, cautious steps. They took cover behind the trees, scanning the property for any signs of movement. Logan spotted a faint light flickering from one of the windows, and his pulse quickened. "This is it," he whispered to Derek, signaling him to take the back entrance while he approached the front. With a final nod, they moved in, positioning themselves for a breach. The door creaked as Logan entered, his weapon at the ready. Inside, the cabin was filled with the stale scent of unwashed laundry and cigarettes. Shadows danced along the walls as the dim light flickered from an old lamp in the corner. Logan's eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of Marcus. And then he heard it, a faint rustling sound from the back room. Logan approached slowly, his footsteps nearly silent as he moved down the narrow hallway. Pushing the door open, he found himself face to face with the man he had been hunting for weeks. Marcus Barnes stood before him, his eyes wide with shock, and then narrowing with defiance. A smug smile curled on his lips, as though he didn't fear what was about to happen. "Officer Ross," Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Been looking for me." Logan kept his weapon trained on Marcus, his expression cold and unwavering. "Marcus Barnes, you're under arrest for kidnapping, trafficking, and a list of other charges I'm sure we'll have no problem proving." Marcus laughed, his voice echoing through the small room. "You think it's that easy, huh?" he taunted. "You arrest me, and suddenly all your problems go away. You have no idea how deep this goes." Logan's grip on his weapon tightened. "Maybe not," he replied, his voice low and controlled. "But I know this ends with you behind bars." Marcus's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Logan saw the glint of something dangerous in his eyes, a twisted sense of power, the kind that only a man with too many secrets could wield. But then the realization seemed to sink in for Marcus. His smirk faded, and his shoulders slumped. The game was over, and he knew it. As Logan cuffed him, he felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that at least one part of the nightmare was coming to an end. He guided Marcus outside, where Derek was waiting with backup officers who had just arrived to secure the property. "Take him to the station," Logan instructed. "I want him in isolation until Navarro's team can question him." Derek nodded, his expression grim as he led Marcus away, the air heavy with the finality of the arrest. Logan took a deep breath, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. The case was far from over, but for Ava, for the girls they had rescued today, and for the countless other children affected by this network, this was a turning point. The path ahead would be long, with testimonies, court proceedings, and all the messy, grueling steps of justice, but he knew he would see it through to the end. Returning to the precinct, Logan spent hours finalizing his report, cataloging the evidence, and working with Navarro's team to ensure the case against Marcus was airtight. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking, painting the city in soft hues of pink and gold. As he stepped outside, exhausted but resolute, he thought of Ava, hoping she was still safe and sleeping soundly in the Andersons' home. He knew he'd visit her later, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. They had taken down one monster, and with any luck, they would bring down the entire network. And in the midst of it all, Logan felt a renewed sense of purpose, a promise to himself that he would keep fighting for the innocent, for the voiceless, for children like Ava who had finally found a way out of the darkness. The past unveiled. As the morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the Andersons' living room, Ava sat curled up on the sofa, absently tracing shapes into the fabric of a pillow. The past few days had been a whirlwind, but for the first time in what felt like forever, She felt something close to peace. In the Andersons' home, she had found a sense of security she hadn't known in years, yet part of her still feared that it could all disappear in an instant. Mrs. Anderson entered the room with a warm smile, carrying a plate of pancakes and a glass of orange juice. "Good morning, Ava," she said, setting the plate in front of her. "I thought you could use a good breakfast before Officer Ross comes by." Ava's eyes lit up at the mention of Logan. Since their first encounter, she had thought of him as her guardian, the one person who had seen through her fear and offered her protection when no one else could. She nodded shyly, murmuring, "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson." As she ate, a quiet knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Anderson went to answer it. A moment later, Logan stepped into the living room, his expression warm as he caught sight of Ava. "Good morning, Ava," he greeted, giving her a reassuring smile. "How are you feeling today?" Ava set down her fork and looked up at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Better, I think," she said softly. "But I keep thinking about Marcus. I keep wondering if he's really gone for good." Logan took a seat across from her, meeting her gaze with a gentle determination. "Marcus is in custody," he assured her, "and he won't be getting out anytime soon. He's going to answer for everything he's done." Ava nodded, but the doubt lingered. She hesitated, her fingers twisting around the edges of her sweater. "There were other people," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who worked with him. I don't know their names, but they used to come by. And they'd talk about me and other kids. I didn't always understand what they meant, but I know they weren't just friends." Logan's expression grew serious. He had suspected that Marcus wasn't acting alone, but hearing it from Ava confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't just a lone criminal. It was an entire network, one that thrived in the shadows and preyed on the vulnerable. "Ava," he said carefully, "anything you can remember about those people or what they said could help us a lot. It could help us stop them and keep other kids safe." Ava swallowed, her gaze dropping to her lap. "I'll try," she murmured, her voice filled with both fear and resolve. She looked up at Logan, and in her eyes, he saw a glimmer of strength, a quiet courage that had sustained her through the darkest days. "Thank you, Ava," Logan replied, his voice soft. "We'll go slowly, one step at a time. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. And so are the Andersons. We're all in this together." After breakfast, Logan led Ava to a quiet room at the precinct, where she would meet with Agent Navarro. Logan had been upfront with her, explaining that Navarro was a specialist who had helped many kids like her, kids who had been hurt and needed a way out. He assured her that she didn't have to share anything she wasn't comfortable with, that she was in control of how much she revealed. Agent Navarro greeted Ava with a warm smile, her eyes kind and understanding. "Hi, Ava," she said, sitting across from her. "It's so nice to meet you. Logan's told me a lot about how brave you've been." Ava shifted nervously in her seat, her gaze flitting between Navarro and Logan. As the interview began, Navarro's gentle demeanor put her at ease. She started with simple questions about school, her favorite hobbies, little things to help Ava relax. Finally, Navarro asked, "Ava, if you're okay with it, could you tell me a little about the people Marcus knew? Maybe what they looked like or anything they said that you remember." Ava took a deep breath, her mind sorting through memories she had tried to bury. "They were mostly men," she began hesitantly. "Sometimes they talk about deliveries or new clients. And one time, I heard Marcus say something about a place by the train tracks. He said that was where he'd be if he ever needed to disappear." Navarro exchanged a quick glance with Logan, her expression tense. "Ava, do you remember anything else about the place by the train tracks? Any other details?" Ava thought for a moment, frowning. "It was kind of far. We drove for a long time, and I remember a sign. It said, Kessler Freight. I don't know if it was a company or just a place, but Marcus seemed to know it really well." Navarro's eyes sharpened, and she made a note. "That's very helpful, Ava," she said, her voice encouraging. "You've given us something we can look into." After the interview, Logan escorted Ava back to the Andersons' home, leaving her in Mrs. Anderson's care before returning to the precinct. As he walked into the briefing room, he found Navarro waiting for him, her gaze intense. "Kessler Freight," she said, sliding a map across the table. "It's an old, abandoned warehouse near the train tracks on the edge of the city. It hasn't been in operation for years, but if Marcus was hiding out there, it could be a central hub for his network." Logan studied the map, his instincts kicking into high gear. So this is where they might have kept some of the kids before moving them. It could still be active. Navarro nodded. "We need to investigate as soon as possible. I'll coordinate with our team, but I want you and Derek on the ground with us. If Marcus's network is as deep as we suspect, this could be our best chance to bring them down." Later that evening, Logan gathered his team, briefing them on the operation. They would approach the warehouse in 2 units, each entering from a different side, to ensure they covered every exit. They would work with Navarro's task force, bringing in backup to secure the perimeter and ensure no one slipped away. As darkness settled over the city, they'd made their way to the warehouse. The area was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant rumble of a passing train. Logan's heart pounded as they approached the entrance, his senses sharp as he took in every detail of the surroundings. With a silent signal, they moved in, their footsteps muffled as they swept through the main floor. The warehouse was dimly lit, its dusty shelves and broken equipment casting long shadows across the walls. Logan's group reached a large storage area near the back of the building, where they found several old crates stacked haphazardly. As they moved closer, a faint noise caught Logan's attention, a whimper, barely audible, coming from one of the crates. "Over here," he whispered to Derek, his pulse quickening. Together, they pried open the crate, revealing a small, cramped compartment where 2 young boys huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. Logan's heart clenched as he took in the sight of them, their bodies bruised and covered in dirt. "It's okay," he said softly, extending a hand. "You're safe now. We're here to get you out." The boys hesitated, their gazes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Finally, one of them reached out, grasping Logan's hand as he helped them out of the crate. Meanwhile, Navarro's team had discovered more compartments scattered throughout the warehouse, each containing children in various states of trauma and exhaustion. It was a horrifying sight, and Logan felt a deep, simmering rage as he realized the full extent of Marcus's operation. He had turned this place into a prison for the innocent, a haven for his twisted empire. With the children safely in the care of medical personnel, Logan and Navarro continued their search, moving through a narrow hallway that led to a smaller office in the back. Inside, they found a desk littered with documents, ledgers, client lists, transaction records. It was a treasure trove of information, each page a piece of the puzzle that would help them dismantle the entire network. Navarro leafed through the documents, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the names. "These are the people funding him," she muttered, her tone laced with disgust. "We've got enough here to track down every single one of them." Logan felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This was the break they had been waiting for, the evidence that would lead to the end of Marcus's network and the liberation of every child he had hurt. As they loaded the evidence into secure boxes, Logan's mind drifted back to Ava. He thought of her bravery, the courage it had taken for her to speak up, to share the information that had ultimately led them here. She was stronger than she knew, and thanks to her, other children would be saved from the horrors she had endured. Returning to the precinct, Logan filed the evidence and reviewed the charges against Marcus and his associates. By the time he finished, it was nearly dawn, and the city outside was just beginning to wake. As he left the station, exhausted but victorious, he knew he had one more stop to make. He drove to the Andersons' home, where Ava was waiting, still uncertain of the future, but no longer alone. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, A shy smile broke across her face. "Did you find him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Logan nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "We did, Ava. Thanks to you, a lot of kids are safe now. You were so brave, and you helped us more than you'll ever know." Ava's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I didn't want anyone else to feel like I did," she whispered. Logan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did more than that, Ava. You helped bring down something terrible. And because of you, we're going to make sure no one else ever has to go through this again." She looked up at him, her face softening as she absorbed his words. And for the first time since they had met, he saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a spark of the life she had been denied for so long. As Logan turned to leave, he knew that the road to recovery would be long for Ava and the others. But he also knew that with time, support, and the love of people like the Andersons, she would find her way. And as for him, he was more determined than ever to keep fighting, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure that justice was served. Because in the end, that was what mattered most, the promise that no child would ever be left to face the darkness alone. Healing and hope. The weeks that followed the takedown of Marcus Barnes and his network brought a quiet but profound shift in Ava's life. Freed from the shadow of fear, she began to settle into a routine with the Andersons. Each day brought new, small steps toward healing, but the journey was far from over. The trauma she had endured wasn't something that could be erased, yet with each passing day, she grew a bit more comfortable, her laughter becoming a little less rare, her smiles a little more genuine. Logan continued to visit her regularly, each time bringing a little gift or spending time sharing stories from his own life to make her laugh. The bond between them grew stronger, and Logan found himself fiercely protective of her, as if she were his own family. Ava seemed to look forward to his visits, and each time he saw her, he noticed a quiet resilience in her eyes, a growing courage that hadn't been there before. One Saturday afternoon, Logan stopped by the Andersons' house with a special plan in mind. He had received clearance from Mrs. Anderson to take Ava on a small outing, a surprise he hoped would lift her spirits and give her a glimpse of the world outside the shelter of their home. He pulled up in his car, and Ava, waiting in the doorway, rushed over to greet him, her face lighting up with excitement. "Where are we going?" she asked, her dark eyes wide with curiosity as she climbed into the passenger seat. Logan grinned, keeping his destination a secret. "You'll see," he said, chuckling at her eagerness. "But first, I have to ask, have you ever been to the aquarium?" Ava's face brightened, and she shook her head. "I've only seen pictures," she replied, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Are we really going?" Logan nodded, a smile spreading across his face as he saw the joy in her eyes. "I figured you might like it," he said, glancing over at her. "There's a whole underwater tunnel where you can see sharks, stingrays, and all kinds of fish swimming right above you. It's pretty amazing." The drive to the aquarium was filled with Ava's chatter, her curiosity spilling over in a series of questions about the different types of sea creatures, the habitats, and everything she hoped to see. For Logan, it was a glimpse into the life she was beginning to reclaim, a life filled with wonder, innocence, and joy. When they arrived, Ava's eyes grew even wider as they entered the grand hall, its walls covered in massive tanks filled with brightly colored fish. She moved slowly, mesmerized by the swirling schools of fish, her hands pressed against the glass as she watched them swim by. "This is incredible," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the tank in front of her. "They look so free." Logan smiled, his heart swelling as he watched her take it all in. He remembered what Agent Navarro had told him about the importance of small, positive experiences in recovery, how even simple joys like this could help build new memories and a sense of safety. And watching Ava now, he saw her beginning to open herself up to the possibility of a future filled with more moments like these. They wandered through the aquarium, visiting each exhibit, And when they finally reached the underwater tunnel, Ava's face lit up in awe. She stepped into the tunnel, looking up as sharks and rays glided above her, their sleek bodies moving gracefully through the water. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. She looked over at Logan, her face thoughtful. "Thank you for bringing me here, for everything." Logan knelt down beside her, his gaze warm and steady. "Ava, you've been through so much, and you're still standing. That takes strength most people don't have," he told her, his voice gentle but firm. "And you don't owe me any thanks. I'm just happy to see you smile." Ava's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her lips curving into a shy smile. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to be happy again," she admitted. "But maybe I can." Logan nodded, feeling a surge of pride. "You will," he assured her, "one day at a time." As they made their way back to the Andersons' house later that afternoon, Ava was quieter, lost in thought. Logan could see the reflection of her face in the window, a mixture of emotions flickering across her features. He knew that moments of joy would still be interspersed with moments of sorrow, but he also knew she was beginning to see the world in color again, after so many years of darkness. When they pulled up to the house, Mrs. Anderson came out to greet them, her face lighting up as Ava ran toward her, eager to share every detail of her adventure. Logan watched the two of them, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for people like the Andersons, who had opened their hearts and home to a child in need of love and care. The following week, Ava had her first court appearance to testify against Marcus Barnes. Logan knew this would be one of the hardest things she would face, but he also knew she was determined to see it through. She had asked him to be there with her, and he had promised he would stand by her side, no matter what. On the day of the trial, Ava sat beside Logan in the courthouse waiting room, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress Mrs. Anderson had bought for her, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. She looked composed on the outside, but Logan could see the anxiety in her eyes, the way her gaze flickered nervously to the door each time it opened. "It's okay to be scared," Logan said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "But remember, you're not alone. I'm here, and so are Mrs. Anderson and Agent Navarro. We'll be with you the whole time." Ava took a deep breath, nodding as she steadied herself. "I just want him to know that he didn't win, that he can't hurt me or anyone else anymore." Logan felt a swell of pride at her words. This young girl, who had been through so much, was about to face her worst fears head-on, not just for herself, but for the other children who had suffered at Marcus's hands. He knew that her bravery would inspire others, that her voice would make a difference. When the bailiff called her name, Ava stood, her chin held high as she walked into the courtroom. Logan followed her, taking a seat where he could keep her in his line of sight, offering her silent support as she took the stand. As she testified, her voice was steady but laced with emotion. She described her experiences with Marcus and the terror she had endured, each word a powerful indictment of the man who had tried to steal her innocence. And throughout it all, she kept her gaze focused, her determination unshakable. At one point, Marcus smirked, a dark glint in his eyes as he watched her, but Ava didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her expression hardening as she continued her testimony. In that moment, Logan felt a surge of pride. She was no longer the terrified child who had whispered for help that day at the precinct. She was a survivor, a fighter. When her testimony was over, Logan joined her in the hallway, where she finally let out a long, shuddering breath, the weight of the ordeal lifting from her shoulders. "You did amazing, Ava," he told her, his voice filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you." Ava looked up at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I knew I had to do it." Logan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you did. You've helped more people than you know, Ava. You've made a difference." The trial stretched on for days, and Logan continued to attend each session, watching as the prosecution built an ironclad case against Marcus and his associates. Thanks to Ava's testimony and the evidence they had gathered from the warehouse, the case was strong, and it was clear that justice was within reach. When the verdict was finally delivered, guilty on all counts, Logan felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was over. Marcus would spend the rest of his life behind bars, and he would never hurt another child again. Ava, who had been sitting beside him in the gallery, looked up at him with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "It's really over?" she asked, her voice filled with a quiet hope. Logan nodded, his expression gentle. "Yes, Ava, it's over." In the weeks that followed, Ava continued to heal, her days filled with art projects, therapy sessions, and small adventures with the Andersons. Logan remained a constant presence in her life, visiting regularly and watching with pride as she grew stronger, more confident, her spirit blooming like a flower reaching toward the sun. One evening, as they sat on the Andersons' porch watching the sunset, Ava turned to him, her face thoughtful. Do you think I'll ever feel completely okay again?" Logan thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think that what you went through will always be a part of your story, Ava. But I also believe that it doesn't have to define you. You're stronger than what happened to you. And you're surrounded by people who care about you and want to help you find happiness." Ava looked out at the horizon, a small smile forming on her lips. I'm starting to believe that," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." Logan felt his chest tighten with emotion. "You're welcome, Ava. And remember, I'll always be here for you, no matter what." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, Logan knew that Ava's journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt and struggle. But he also knew that she would face them with courage, surrounded by people who loved her and believed in her strength. For Ava, the darkness was finally giving way to light, and in that moment, Logan felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had played a part in helping her find her way back to hope. A new beginning. Months passed, and each day brought Ava closer to a life she hadn't thought possible. The Andersons continued to provide her with a stable and loving home, where she learned what it meant to be part of a family, a real family, one that embraced her and encouraged her dreams. With their unwavering support, she began to heal in ways she hadn't anticipated. Yet there was one part of Ava's life she hadn't quite reconciled: school. After everything she had gone through, the thought of being around so many unfamiliar faces, of trying to blend in and act normal, made her uneasy. But when Mrs. Anderson gently suggested it might be time for her to attend a few classes and meet kids her age, Ava found herself willing to try. On a bright September morning, Ava stood in the doorway of her new school, her hand clutching Mrs. Anderson's as they waited in the front office. Her stomach twisted with anxiety, but she drew strength from the presence of the Andersons and from the thought of Logan, who had promised to be there after school to hear about her first day. Ava's first period was art, a class the school had strategically scheduled to help her ease into the day. She slipped into the room, taking a seat near the back, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. But within minutes, she was captivated by the vibrant colors of paints and brushes, by the smell of fresh canvas, by the limitless possibilities spread out before her. "Welcome, Ava," said Mrs. Bowers, her art teacher, with a warm smile. "I heard you have a talent for drawing. Would you like to show the class?" Ava's heart skipped, caught between the thrill of sharing her art and the fear of standing out. With a soft nod, she pulled out her sketchbook, the one she'd worked on for weeks in the Andersons' cozy living room. She flipped to a page where she had drawn the underwater scene from her trip to the aquarium. A gentle sea turtle gliding through coral, its shell detailed with delicate swirling patterns. The class fell silent as Mrs. Bowers held up the drawing, the students murmuring in appreciation. One of the girls, Lily, a curly-haired redhead who sat beside Ava, leaned over and whispered, "That's amazing. You're really talented." Ava's cheeks flushed, but she couldn't hide her smile. It was the first time she had been openly praised by her peers, and something about it made her feel just a little bit braver. As the class continued, Ava found herself chatting softly with Lily and a few other students, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this new environment could be a fresh start. By the end of the day, Ava had made a few friends and felt the nervous weight on her shoulders begin to lighten. When the final bell rang, she gathered her things and walked out to the school steps, where she found Logan waiting for her, a proud smile on his face. "How'd it go, champ?" he asked, ruffling her hair as she grinned up at him. I actually liked it," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I made a friend. And in art class, they liked my drawing. It felt nice." Logan's smile widened, his heart swelling with pride. "That's amazing, Ava. I knew you'd do great." They spent the ride back to the Andersons' house talking about her day, with Ava sharing every detail: the classes, the teachers, the jokes she'd heard from her classmates. Logan listened, his focus fully on her, as if nothing in the world could be more important. Back at the Andersons, Mrs. Anderson had prepared a special dinner to celebrate her first day of school. They gathered around the table, laughter and stories filling the air as they shared a meal. Ava felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of belonging that was slowly becoming more real each day. Later that evening, after dinner, Logan pulled Mrs. Anderson aside. They sat in the Andersons' quiet living room, the hum of the dishwasher and Ava's soft laughter drifting in from the kitchen. "I've been thinking," Logan began, his voice low but purposeful. "Ava's made so much progress here, and she's found a real family with you. But I don't want her to feel like her life is being decided for her without her input. I want to talk to her about a permanent home arrangement. She deserves to have a choice." Mrs. Anderson nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think that's wise. Ava's come so far, but she's still healing. I think it would mean a lot for her to have a say in what comes next." They agreed to speak with Ava the following evening, gently explaining the options and giving her the space to express her feelings. Logan knew this would be a delicate conversation, but he trusted Ava's strength, the courage she had shown time and again. When the next evening arrived, Logan joined the Andersons in their living room, where Ava sat nestled between Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. She looked at him with a curious but calm expression, and he could see the glimmer of strength in her eyes, a reflection of all she had endured and overcome. "Ava," he began, his voice steady, "we wanted to talk to you about something important. About your future." He exchanged a glance with Mrs. Anderson, who nodded encouragingly. "You've been through so much, and I want you to know that we all support you, no matter what you choose. But we thought, maybe it's time for you to decide where you'd like to call home." Ava's eyes widened slightly, and she looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. After a moment, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never really thought about having a choice," she admitted. "For so long, I just went wherever they told me to go." Mr. Anderson reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "Well, Ava, this time, the choice is all yours. You're part of our family now, and we would be honored to adopt you, if that's something you'd like. But if you prefer something else, we'll understand and support you." Ava's gaze shifted to Logan, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. What do you think I should do?" she asked him, her voice small. Logan leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "I think you should follow your heart, Ava. You're safe here, with people who care about you. You've come so far, and now you deserve to find peace, to build a future that makes you happy. This choice belongs to you." Ava was quiet for a long time, her gaze drifting around the room, taking in the faces of the people who had come to mean so much to her. Finally, she looked up, her expression resolute. "I want to stay here," she said softly, her voice growing stronger. "With the Andersons, I feel safe here, and I want this to be my home." Mr. and Mrs. Anderson smiled, their eyes filled with tears, and they pulled her into a warm embrace. Logan felt his own eyes misting as he watched the family form before him, a sense of peace settling over him. In the weeks that followed, the adoption process began. With each step, Ava's place in the Anderson family became more secure, and she blossomed in ways Logan hadn't even imagined. She joined her school's art club, where her talent flourished under the guidance of Mrs. Bowers, who encouraged her to explore new mediums and techniques. She made more friends, slowly but surely letting others into her world. On weekends, Logan often joined the Andersons for family outings, their lives intertwined in a bond that went beyond friendship. They spent afternoons at the park, picnicking by the lake, where Ava would sketch the scenery or try to capture the shimmering water on her canvas. Logan marveled at how much she had grown, at how a girl who had once been afraid to speak now laughed freely and dreamed boldly. One afternoon, as Logan and Ava sat on a bench overlooking the lake, she turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I used to think I'd never be able to trust anyone again," she said quietly. "But you showed me that not everyone in the world is out to hurt me. You helped me believe in people again." Logan felt a lump rise in his throat, his heart swelling with pride. "Ava, it's been an honor to watch you grow, and to see the strength you've always had inside you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You're an inspiration, not just to me, but to everyone around you. Never forget that." She looked out at the lake, a small smile playing on her lips. "Maybe one day I can help others too," she mused, her tone soft but hopeful. "Like you helped me." Logan nodded, seeing the fire of purpose in her eyes. "I have no doubt you will, Ava. You'll change lives, just like you've changed mine." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the lake, Logan felt a sense of closure, a peace he hadn't known in years. Ava's journey had been long and difficult, filled with pain and struggle, but she had emerged stronger, more resilient, a testament to the power of love and kindness. In the months that followed, Ava officially became Ava Anderson, her name symbolizing her new beginning, her second chance at a life filled with love and security. The Andersons, Logan, and her friends stood by her side every step of the way, celebrating her victories and supporting her through the challenges. Years passed, and Ava grew into a young woman, her passion for art blossoming into a career. She became an advocate for children in need, working with organizations that provided safe havens for kids like her, those who had endured the unthinkable and needed someone to guide them toward hope. And every time she spoke, every time she shared her story, she thought of Logan, of the day he had knelt beside her in that police station, offering her a lifeline when she had felt lost. On her 21st birthday, Ava held a small gathering at her art studio, a place she had built with the support of those who had believed in her. Logan, now a close family friend, arrived with a small gift, a photo of the two of them from her first day at the aquarium all those years ago. Ava held the photo, her eyes filling with tears as she looked up at him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Logan smiled, pulling her into a warm hug. "You're more than welcome, Ava," he replied. "Watching you grow into the incredible person you are today has been the greatest gift I could ask for." And as they stood there, surrounded by friends and family, Logan felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that Ava had not only survived but had thrived. She had reclaimed her life, her identity, and her dreams. And in that moment, he knew that they had both found something precious, something that went beyond friendship or family. They had found hope, and in that hope, they had both found their purpose.